Hello, my name is Patrick Callahan from the LabArchives support team, and this will be a demonstration of LabArchives Professional Edition. To begin, LabArchives is an electronic lab notebook or ELN service, and it's meant to replace your paper lab notebook as a tool that you can use to store, secure, search, and share and publish your scientific data. And LabArchives is also a cloud-based platform, which means that you can access your data from any device that has an internet connection, be it a desktop or laptop, a tablet or smartphone, whether it's an Apple or Windows, Android or Mac device. As long as it has an internet connection, you can use it to access LabArchives. Now, in the center of the screen, we can see one page of a LabArchives notebook. And as I scroll down this page, you can see different parts of the page. You can see that LabArchives allows you to record data in the form of text, images, file attachments, and many more types of data. Of course, this is only one page in a LabArchives notebook, which can contain many pages. The structure for these pages is displayed on the left side of the screen in what I call the notebook directory. The notebook directory functions very similar to your desktop file browser. So you have folders within which there could be subfolders or sub-subfolders, but ultimately it's the page that's contained in the folder, and it's on the page the data is kept. So you can see as I click different pages in the directory here, different content appears in the center of the screen. Also, like the file browser on your desktop, you can do things in the directory like drag and drop folders or pages from one position to another. You can right-click any folder or page and you'll see this dialog menu come up where you have the option to do things like adding new folders and pages, copying existing folders and pages, renaming or deleting existing folders and pages are also possible through this menu. I will get into later though how deleting is never really completely done in LabArchives, and I'll explain how deleted items can be recovered a little bit later. Now, the directory, which allows you to navigate within a notebook. By contrast, above the directory, you see what I call the notebook selector. This is a drop-down menu that allows you to navigate between notebooks. And you can see all notebooks that you have access to within this drop-down. Now, LabArchives does not limit you based on the number of notebooks you own or the number of notebooks that have been shared with you. So you can have as much of that, as many notebooks as you want, provided you don't exceed your data. And notebooks you own and notebooks you do not own are distinguished by this black check mark. So you can see for notebooks I own, there is a black check mark. For notebooks I don't own, there is no check mark. And the owner is always indicated in a window to the right. I can start typing into this drop-down to quickly find certain notebooks. And then at the very bottom of the notebook selector, there are two options which I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about. I'll start with the Manage Notebooks option. This option is basically a list of notebook-based tools, including a place where you can clone notebooks. It's also a place where you can hide notebooks from view in the selector if you're trying to trim up the space in your drop-down menu. But I'd like to spend a little bit more time talking about the Create New Notebook option. You may not have the responsibility to create notebooks in LabArchives, but if you do, you should know that it's good to have a consistent notebook creation policy. Now, whatever that policy might be depends on your lab. With smaller labs, we might see things like one notebook for the entire lab, and this is really good for the labs that aren't particularly interested in obscuring data between researchers, and they don't really want to set up complicated permissions. They just want to have one place where everyone can see everyone else's data and they can just start working. In that case, if you're a small lab with not many projects going on at once, that might be the best option for you because it's very easy to just get started with only one notebook. But more commonly, we'll see things like one notebook per project. And in these project-based notebooks, you might have a folder for each participant or a folder for each portion of the project. You can have a hybrid approach, But if you're really not sure where to start in terms of notebook creation policy, I would just create one notebook for each researcher. And that way each individual has a place where she or he can put their own data. And as they continue to work with LabArchives, opportunities to collaborate with that data will become more obvious. Now I'd like to direct your attention to the top of the screen where you can see the notebook search bar. You can use this search bar to search your data just by typing into the search bar. And if you click this yellow button here, that'll execute a simple search. And that'll search the currently selected notebook. You can also do an advanced search by clicking this upside down triangle here. That opens the Advanced Search Tools window. In this window, you've got a variety of fields that will allow you to further refine your search. You also have the ability to search across multiple notebooks at once, or all of the notebooks in your account. So using this search tool, you can search all of your notebooks simultaneously and do a really thorough perusal of your data. Now I'd like to spend some time showing you how to create new content in LabArchives. So let's go back to the directory. I'll just minimize everything to make it nice and clean. Now I'm going to click New. And in the window that appears, I'm going to select Add New Page. And that creates a new page in the directory. The page name can be typed in the directory itself. Alternatively, I can edit the page name at any time by clicking this purple pencil icon at the top of the screen. Really, they're just kind of two ways of doing the same thing. Whatever way is more comfortable for you is what I encourage. But this is what a blank page looks like. And you can add data to the page in the form of segments these segments that LabArchives calls entries. And entries come in a variety of types. Your most frequently used entry types will appear in the Add Entry toolbar. The remainder of available entry types will appear under the More drop-down menu. And you can see we've got a lot of different entry types, so I'm not going to go over all of them, but I will cover the most frequently used ones, starting with the rich text entry. The rich text entry is the most frequently edited entry in LabArchives. And essentially, 9 times out of 10 when you're adding text to your notebook, this is the entry type you're going to want to use. So when I click rich text, that's going to add this word processor prompt to the page, and I can start adding some text. If you used Microsoft Word before, then you know how this works. The text that I add can be formatted in a variety of ways. It could be aligned to the center, to the left, to the right. And of course, it can be put in a variety of fonts, sizes, and colors. Also, like any word processor, you can embed images and media into a rich text entry. So again, very similar feature. I can save my edits for this entry or for any entry for that matter by clicking the Save to Page button in the upper left. And that'll save the entry to the page, and it'll also append a timestamp for the saving of that entry. These timestamps we get from our partnership with NIST, the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. So because our timestamps come from their clock, there's no way that any user of LabArchives can somehow game their device's machine clock to produce some faulty time. The time for each action in LabArchives will always come with a timestamp that's the official time for the given user's region. And you'll see this timestamp all over the place as I continue to add data to the page. Now next, I'm going to add a heading. And headings are really good for dividing a page into sections, particularly as your page becomes longer or changes topic. It's useful to section that out with headings visually. So I'll add one now, and I'll just start typing, or I'll type this. I'll click Save to Page. And again, there's that timestamp I've been mentioning. Now this looks a little bit strange because the heading is below the rich text entry that it's apparently referring to. So I'm going to want to bring this entry up one position. To do that, I just go to the arrows that you can see appear whenever I hover my cursor over an entry. As you might guess, I can click the up arrow to move the entry up one, and I can click the down arrow to move the entry down one. And as I said, these appear over each entry, so any entry can be moved up or down the page this way at any time. Oops. There we go. Now, if you want the next entry you insert to just be in a specific position, you don't want to have to move it after creating it, you can just bring your cursor where you want the next entry to go, whether that's at the top of the page, between two pre-existing entries, at the bottom of the page. Wherever you want the entry to go, just bring your cursor there and you'll see a dotted line appears. Click that dotted line and that brings up the Insert Entry tab. And any entry created from within this tab will be inserted into that given position. And next I'm going to talk about file attachments. And this whole next chunk of the presentation will cover specifically how to get file attachments in your notebook. Now there's a lot of different ways to do this. The most straightforward way in my opinion is just to select attachment from your list of entry types. So I'll do that now. You can see when I do that this purple drop box appears. Click Add Files to open up your file browser and you can select some file or files. Once you're done dumping files into the Dropbox, click Save to Page. And that will upload the files to the page. Now, if you find file browsing kind of old-fashioned or clunky, you could, of course, just bring up the directory that contains the files you're interested in, as I'm doing here. And I'll just drag this Excel sheet onto the page. And just like with file browsing, you can continually add files to this Dropbox. And whenever you're done, just click Start Upload. So using file browse or drag and drop, you can actually add up to 50 files at once to a page. But if you want a more organized or automated way of uploading files, we have a couple of additional options for you. The first one I want to talk about is the LabArchives inbox. So the inbox is great for those users that like to send files by email. To send files to your LabArchives inbox, simply send an email from the email address registered with your LabArchives account to inbox@labarchives.com. And when you do that, any file attachments contained in your email along with the body of the email itself are going to end up here in your LabArchives inbox. And of course, you can access the contents of your inbox by clicking the inbox icon where it appears at the top of the notebook directory. And you can see I have 2 items in my inbox. These items are totally private to my account until I choose to move them out of the inbox and into some specific notebook. Now you can do this manually or you can do this automatically. To do this manually, you would just go to the inbox and click. You could see whenever I hover my cursor over an entry in the inbox, there's an option that says Move to Page. I can click that and then choose within the currently selected notebook where I want the file to go. But if I want that done automatically, I can set up inbox rules. These are accessible in the upper right of the inbox. Inbox rules are basically just rules that say, I always want files of this particular type when they show up in my inbox to go to this particular notebook under this particular page. So I have a Microsoft Office files rule here that says whenever I get files with these extensions in my inbox, automatically reroute them to the notebook Project 1 notebook under the page Project 1. I also have a GraphPad Prism file rule here that says whenever I get files with these extensions in my inbox, automatically reroute them to the notebook Small PDF Test under the page Grants. So if you like to send files by email and you want them automatically ported to a notebook of your choosing, I would highly recommend you check out the inbox. Now the next 2 file upload options appear under Downloads, which is an option in the triple bar icon menu in the upper right. These 2 options, unlike the previous cloud-based options I've been going over, actually do require that you download something onto your local machine. That being said, both of these programs are totally free and they're both compatible with Windows and Apple machines. So I'll start with the Microsoft Office plugin. This is a plugin that allows you to basically upload content and save content and open content from directly within Microsoft Office where it is saved in LabArchives. So you could start up Microsoft Office, create your document, and then save it to LabArchives from within Microsoft Office. You don't have to start up your internet browser. You can even at a later date start up Microsoft Office and open MS Office file saved in LabArchives and not even on your local machine. You could start working on it and once you're done, just save, and it'll save back to LabArchives again. So this is a really good plugin for those of you that spend most of your workday in Microsoft Office, or much of your workday. Especially if you're a long-time Excel user and you create a lot of plots, this could be a much more convenient plugin for you than, or this could be a much more convenient document creation interface for you than perhaps our online document editor might be. So definitely recommend you check that out if that describes you. Folder Monitor, on the other hand, is a general file upload assistant, and it's a standalone program, unlike the previous download, which was a plugin for Microsoft Office. And the best way to describe it is to just describe a bunch of good use cases for it, so I'll just describe a few of those. One of the most common use cases is if you're working offline. That is, you're working on files that are saved to your local hard drive, or they're saved in some network directory you have access to. And you're creating new files, you're making edits to pre-existing files, and you want all of this work that you're doing to be automatically synced online to LabArchives as you do it. Folder Monitor can do that for you. Even if you don't have an internet connection, Folder Monitor can collect all the updates that you're making to the given directory. Once you do have an internet connection, it'll sync all of that data. Another good application of Folder Monitor is if you're a lab that's brand new to LabArchives and you've already got a bunch of data, you can use Folder Monitor to quickly dump large folders of data into LabArchives, and you can even have them organized subfolder by subfolder exactly as they are in the source directory. So it's generally a really good file upload tool, great for syncing offline work, great for working when you don't have an internet connection, and great for just getting a lot of files into LabArchives quickly. So if any of those use cases sound like they could apply to you, definitely check out Folder Monitor. But we've been talking about the different ways to get data into LabArchives. Now I'd like to spend some time talking about what you can do once that data is there. Now, I'll start by saying we will take any file type as an attachment in LabArchives. There's no file type that you can come across, whether it's a .abc or a .123, that we just can't allow you to upload. We'll accept all file types. That being said, there are certain file types, such as images and Microsoft Office files, that once they are uploaded to the platform can be edited further within LabArchives itself. So for instance, this Excel document, I can edit this in LabArchives by hovering my cursor over the document thumbnail and clicking Edit Online. And that opens up the online document editor for LabArchives. Now this editor is compatible with Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. We're just looking at the Excel version here. Now you can see it's very similar to Excel itself. It has cell-based formulae, and it has autofill. And if of course, if I drop my cursor into any one cell and make some edits, you can see the prompt "Close window to save your changes" in the upper right. This is just to indicate to you that there is an automatic save feature in this online document editor, and you don't have to worry about pressing Control S or finding the save button in the toolbar. The saving is done for you automatically here. Other than that, the document editor is pretty straightforward, so I'll move on. The next thing I wanted to address is the image annotator in LabArchives. So any image that's been uploaded as a file attachment can be annotated within LabArchives by hovering your cursor over the document thumbnail and clicking Annotate. So the annotator works pretty similar to Microsoft Paint, if you've ever used that program before. You can make some simple annotations. For instance, if I wanted to emphasize the importance of this oxygen atom, I could use the arrow and line tool. If I wanted to circle this ferrocene molecule, I might do something like this. And then maybe I want to add some text. When I close the annotator, you can see the annotations appear on top of the image. Now you may have also noticed that I was clicking the Save button in the upper left of the screen multiple times. You don't have to do that. It's certainly more intuitive to just save at the end of your session. The reason why I did that is so I could create multiple versions and show you how the revisions history in LabArchives works. And I'll start by saying that LabArchives records everything you do in the notebook the moment the notebook is created onward. And you can view those actions that have been taken in the notebook under specific entries or under entire pages. So to see the revisions history by entry, go to the given entry you're interested in, click on the gear icon and select revisions. And that'll show you the revisions table for that entry. So you can see this particular entry, this image, has 4 actions that are taken on it. Each action comes with a timestamp, the name of the person who performed the action, and the IP address from which the action was performed. And if I click the timestamps, I can actually see an image of the way the entry looked at each stage of revision. So maybe I don't like my text anymore. You know, I like my circle and I like my arrow, but let's say I don't like my text. If that were true, then I could easily revert to the version without the text by going to revert to this version for the earliest version that doesn't have, or the latest version that doesn't have text. I'll click OK, and the text is gone. I can even delete this image. If I go to the same gear icon and I select delete, when I click OK, it appears as though the file is gone, but it's not really gone. Because if I go to the revisions button in the upper right just by page tools, I'll be brought to the page revisions history, and that shows all actions that have been taken on the page since the page's creation. And that'll of course include the deletion of that file attachment that just happened a moment ago. I can undo this deletion at any time by selecting undelete. When I click OK, the file comes back. So in the true spirit of the scientific method, no data can ever be truly erased once it's been added to the page. Even if you delete a folder or a page directly from the directory, as I was showing you before, you can select delete item. All that's going to do is bring the item to the deleted items bucket. This deleted items bucket functions basically like the recycling bin on your desktop, except there is no empty recycling bin button. So any content that's in the deleted items bucket can be restored to the notebook at any time by right-clicking and selecting undelete item. And that'll restore it with all of its edits, including the revisions history and everything. Now, the next thing that I'd like to talk about, given that we're done with the revisions history, is sharing. So you can share content in LabArchives in either at the very small level or at the very large comprehensive level. The smallest level being the entry. If you wanted to share a single entry, you'll find that option under the gear icon. To share an entire page, you would click the share button in the upper right of the page, or you could right-click where the page appears in the directory. You'll see an option for share in the dialog menu. The same being true, of course, if you wanted to share an entire folder, or if you wanted to share an entire notebook. Now, whatever share button you pick, you're going to see the same thing. So I'm going to click this share button in the upper right of the page, and that'll just to share this page. Now notice that the window notice the banner for this share window says share quote my first page. This is identical to the page title. This is to indicate to you that this share action will only share this page. It will not share any other entry, page, or folder in the notebook. Now to execute your share, you will have to specify the email address of the recipient. And when you send this invite out, an email automatically generated by our system will go to the recipient saying that content in LabArchives has been shared with them, and there will be a link that takes them to the shared content. Now, the recipient does not have to have a LabArchives account at the time you share to see this content, but they will have to have a LabArchives account at some point to see this content. They can easily create one if they don't already have one just by clicking on the same link in this email that I mentioned earlier. In the event that they don't have an account, the system will just prompt them to create one first. It takes about 30 seconds, and then they can see whatever you're sharing with them. Now, if you have time, I would recommend you also take advantage of the subject and message fields here. These allow you to append custom subject and messages to the email automatically sent out by our system. And in that way, if you fill these out, you can, in the same action that you share content with somebody, tell them, why you're sharing this content or what you want them to do with it. Finally, I'd like to call your attention to the permission selectors down here. With to view selected, when you send out the share, the recipient will have read-only rights on that content. When you have to edit selected when you send out the share, the recipient will have edit rights on that content. I'm going to send this invite out now by clicking send. And you can see that, or actually let me refresh to get all the changes to percolate through. You can see that this has made some slight visual changes in the notebook. First of all, in the directory, you can see that this shared page now contrasts with these unshared pages. You can see it's got these two little people in it. That indicates that the page has been shared with at least one other person. You see the same two little people icon in the upper right of each entry on the page because, of course, all parts of the page have been shared. And in a nutshell, that's how sharing works in LabArchives. Now, the next thing I'd like to talk about is some additional entry features that are available to you. Specifically, I'm referring to this cassette of buttons that appears whenever I hover my cursor over an entry. I'd like to go through all of these icons now. Now, we've already touched on some of these icons a little bit. We've talked about the up and down arrows. We've talked about the gear icon. I have not specifically mentioned this pencil icon, but this is how you would bring an entry into edit mode. You would just click this pencil, and then you can start editing. Alternatively, you can just double-click the given entry, and that will also bring the entry into edit mode. I personally find double-clicking more comfortable, but again, I encourage you to do whatever you like more. But now I would like to address the comment bubble, the entry linking button, and the tags button. And I'll start with commenting, since we just talked about sharing. So you can comment on any entry you have access to, provided the notebook owner has allowed it, in LabArchives. To do that, you would just hover your cursor over the entry, as I'm doing now, and click the comment bubble. And that would open up the pre-existing comment thread if there was one, along with a field where you can write your own comment, of course. And you would add the comment to the page by clicking Add Comment. Now, the reason why this is useful is because when you comment on someone else's work, or rather, when you comment on an entry that another person has edited at least once before, that person gets a notification in their notifications icon in the upper right. Now, this notifications icon works very similar to the Facebook newsfeed icon if you're a Facebook user. It basically shows a red numbered badge indicating the number of notifications you have. When you click on the notifications icon, you get brought to the activity feed, which is basically a searchable and sortable list of all the actions that have been occurring in your notebooks and the notebooks that you have access to. And you've got multiple different feed types and filters, so you can do a very thorough search of what's going on in your data with this tool. Now, next I'll talk about entry linking. Now, to be clear, entry linking isn't the same as hyperlinking. If you wanted to add a hyperlink, you of course are free to do that using the Rich Text Entries toolbar. So I could select some text, and then I would click this button to add a hyperlink. And I would just paste my URL in here, and that string of text will become a clickable URL. I'm not talking about hyperlinking here. I'm talking about entry linking. Now, entry linking is a little bit different from hyperlinking. Here, let me find the page that has the hyperlink in it, or the entry link rather. Well, I guess I don't have that page anymore. Well, at any rate, when you create a link, it'll essentially appear as a little icon in the upper right hand corner of the entry. So I'll just type in some simple URL. And you can see that it now appears as an icon in the upper right, and you can go to that URL or you can go to that page if it could be another notebook page. The reason why entry linking is useful is because it allows you to refer to items not on this same page while you read content on this page. So there are many instances if you're dealing with large files like large images, large text files, where the file will actually exceed our file upload limit of 250 megabytes for most standard subscriptions or 4 gigabytes for premium subscriptions. If you want to refer to a file that is too big to be put into LabArchives, a really good way of doing that is with entry linking. Particularly because if you select web address /URL and you go to this box here, you can put in the directory pathway for whatever network, whatever file you want to refer to that's stored on a network directory. And as long as the viewer has access to that network directory, they'll be able to use the entry link as a way to refer to the file in the same entry in which you're describing your important conclusions from that file or from that data. So it's just a really good way. And then, of course, if you have another online storage service such as Dropbox, you could use links from that online service in here. Now, another really common application for entry linking is referring to protocols. If you are choosing to refer to a protocol specifically, you might want to check out the version when this link was created option. If you turn that on, then you can be sure that the link you generate refers to the protocol as it existed at the time you made the link and not just whatever the protocol looks like most recently. So if either of these applications interest you, I suggest you check out entry linking. Now the next thing I wanted to talk about is tagging. And to illustrate the applications of tagging more effectively, let me quickly navigate to a notebook where I actually have more tags. Now, this is an example of an entry with some tags on it, and here are the tags in the upper right of the entry right here. To modify the tags on an entry, I would, of course, click the tag icon. I can remove existing tags by clicking on the X at the left side of each tag block. And then you can see when I drop my cursor in the tags field, this drop-down menu showing me all of the tags I've used at least once before appears, or all the tags I've used at least once before in this notebook, rather. And I can select any one of these tags to add additional tags to the notebook. I can also just start typing. And that string of text that I type when I press enter becomes a new tag. Now, what makes tags so useful is that they act like clickable search links. So if I click on PCR analysis, for instance, I'll be brought to a page that shows me all of the entries rather with the same tag PCR analysis. And you can see for each search result, the appropriate tag is highlighted in the upper right. There's also there's also a link in the upper left that will take you to the file location, or where each search result is held in your notebook. There'll be a link that takes you to that place. Now, what you're doing here is grouping like data points together very, very quickly, just with one click. And you can do this one-click grouping not just within a single notebook, but across all of your notebooks. But because the tags field is one of the fields that appears in the Advanced Search Tools menu, which is, as I said, a tool that allows you to search across all of your notebooks at once. So this comes in handy whenever you're dealing with a project that has a multiplicity of files. There's just many, many files. And as these files accumulate, you might notice that it becomes less convenient to keep everything on the same page. It might even become less inconvenient for you to keep everything in the same folder or the same notebook. So if you find yourself in that situation where files are just kind of dispersing across your account, I would highly recommend you develop a project tagging system, as many other LabArchives users have done, in which every time you bring in a file specific to some project, you tag that file with the project's ID tag. And if you keep that practice up in the future, all you have to do is type in the tag for that specific project and search across all notebooks, and in one click you can bring up all the data you have for some project. So really what you're doing is you're developing a controlled search vocabulary for your notebook data. So if that's something you'd be interested in, I highly recommend you check out tags. Now, first I'll go back to the notebook we're working out of. We've been talking about what you can do to get data into the notebook and what you can do once that data is there. Now I'd like to address some tools you can use once you're done putting data in a particular notebook page or in a notebook in general. So first I want to mention our DOI option. DOI is an acronym that stands for Digital Object Identifier, and it's used whenever you want to publish your LabArchives data. That is, you're making some online publication and you want to refer to this data you have in LabArchives using a DOI. If you wanted to do that, you would just click DOI for the given content level. Just like with sharing, you can DOI at the individual entry level, at the entire page level, oops, and then at the folder or notebook level, you can just right-click the icon, you'll see a button for DOI. Now when you open the DOI window, you'll see a window that looks like this. There's a lot of DOI options, and I'll leave you to go over these, but basically they involve just what your viewer can see and cannot see. But to actually make a DOI public, you will have to check this box. And until this box is checked, your DOI will actually not be public, and they'll still require standard LabArchives permissions to see it. Once you check this box, this content does become publicly accessible, and anyone with the DOI or with the share link can access your content. So if you wanted to undo that at a later date, you could just uncheck this box, and just like that, it becomes non-public again. Now, the next feature I wanted to talk about is the sign page feature. If you have a signing practice in your lab, we can facilitate this directly with the sign page feature. Basically, this is just a button that appears in the upper right where I have been indicating. This will not be visible for all people in a LabArchives notebook. Only that notebook's owner and the administrators in that notebook will be able to see the sign page button in the upper right. Given that it is visible to you, however, if you click on this button, you will see the sign page disclaimer window come up. Basically says, by clicking on the sign page button below, I understand that I'm affixing my electronic signature to the page, and I understand that the page is going to be permanently frozen. Given that I understand that, I click sign page. And you can see now that I've done this, my electronic signature appears in the upper left, along with a timestamp for my signature. And you can see that I can't edit anything on this page. I can check out the comments, I can look at the revisions, I can share, I can make a DOI, I can print, but I cannot edit anything. And this is permanent. There is no way to unsign a page once it's been signed, and it's been deliberately designed that way to protect the integrity of the data on the page. Now, when I say that, many customers ask, well, what do I do if I sign a page by accident? Or what do I do if I want to, at a later date, unlock a page that's been signed? So you can do this. What it would involve is actually copying the page. What you would do is you would click New. You'd select Copy Existing Page. Select the signed page, so that'd be kinetics analysis for me. And then click Create Page. And the new copy that you make will actually be unsigned. And just to prove this to you, I can double-click any rich text entry and just start making arbitrary edits. You can see those are saved. Now, the revisions history for this page will reflect that this page is a copy and that the original is still signed. So just be aware of that whenever you're working with signed pages. Now, next, I'd like to mention our notebook export options. These appear under the triple bar icon menu in the upper right under Utilities. You can see those are the bottom two options in the Utilities menu. So both of these options, Notebook to PDF and Create Offline Notebook, basically export an offline copy of either a portion or all of your notebook. And well, these are certainly readable. They're not editable. There's no way to edit your offline copy such that the edits appear online. So if you are interested in doing something like that, I suggest you check out Folder Monitor, which can allow you to edit offline and the edits appear online. But Given that you know that it's read-only, the export options here, notebook to PDF and create offline notebook, are mostly different in what you actually want to do with the export. So if you just want to share something with a colleague without actually giving them access to LabArchives, you're just sharing part of your notebook, PDF is a good way of doing that. Most of us are a lot more familiar with PDFs than we are with offline HTML files, which is what this will come in. But if you're backing up, if you're exporting your notebook for the purposes of backing it up, so you can have a redundant copy, so you feel more secure with your data, I suggest you use the Create Offline Notebook option, because that's going to give you a higher fidelity copy. It's going to give you something that looks more closely to what you see online than with Notebook to PDF. Now that is it regarding the things you can do in LabArchives after data has been added to the page. That is when you're done putting data on the page. The final thing I want to go over before we close out this presentation will be widgets. And to cover widgets more effectively, I'll add a new page. Most broadly, what widgets are customizable HTML forms. They can do calculations. They can act like basic data templates. They can act like an online inventory. There's a lot of different applications for them. And I'll go through some of these applications now. Most fundamentally, widgets are divided between widgets that are custom and widgets that are pre-made. So there's a list of pre-made widgets that are given to all LabArchives users, and those widgets are indicated with these purple icons. All of these humanoid icon widgets, these are all custom widgets. So I'll start with some pre-made widgets, and then I'll show you some custom widgets. So let's start with chemical inventory. This is a widget that's commonly used for inventory. It could be used for many other things. The usage is pretty general. I'll show you how it works. So we'll click Use Chemical Inventory, and that adds the widget to the page. And you can see the widget shows you right off the bat a window with several fields that you can fill out. So just for demonstration's purpose, I'll fill out a few of these windows. And then I'll save the widget to the page. And this is what the widget looks like with only one row in it. Now, if I wanted to add another row, I would click New, and I would see this window again. And you could see each new entry in the database widget, or in the inventory widget rather, is saved as a new row in the widget. Now, of course, this isn't a very common use case. Of course, you usually will have many, many more rows than just two in your widget. So to give you an idea of what that looks like, let me take you to my inventory page. So this is an example of a inventory widget with 132 rows, and it's a lot more common given what you'll see in the real application. Now you can choose to display up to 100 entries at once with the inventory widget. And you can even do things like alphabetize and reverse alphabetize each row. See, when I click these arrows, it allows me to alphabetize and reverse alphabetize. I can search for some specific row. So like if I just start typing, that's isolated as one out of 132 rows very, very quickly. You can also do things like show or hide certain columns, depending on how closely or not so closely you're trying to look at the database. And you can do stuff like copy the data to a clipboard, or export the data as a CSV, Excel, or PDF file. Now, this particular user did not generate this data by inputting, row by row by row 132 times. Actually, we have a feature that allows you to take a pre-existing spreadsheet, as long as it's a CSV file, and upload it directly into a widget. To do that, you would just use the import CSV file. That's an option at the very bottom of your More drop-down menu. There's a couple of requirements for your CSV file. You can look these up under the help page at LabArchives support. But essentially, you can just use that function, import CSV, to dump spreadsheet contents from an offline spreadsheet into a widget. And you can even dump them in a widget besides this one. This is one way to upload your spreadsheet contents in the inventory widget. Another way is the freezer box widget, which is good for any users that have spreadsheets that basically detail a biorepository or any array of samples. You could see it's a lot like the database widget, or the inventory widget rather, except it stores its sub-entries in the form of a grid array rather than a spreadsheet with a bunch of rows. So, you know, if I click edit, I'll see the custom window for my own data for this freezer box. When I click the edit, and I'll see this window here. Let's see. Just to give you an idea of what this looks like. But those are the two very commonly used off-the-shelf widgets, the database widget and the freezer box widget. Before we end this presentation, I'd just like to show you some custom widgets. So I'll start with the NeuroCog language widget. Most of the time, if you're not using a pre-made widget, you're not using the import CSV file function, then the widgets you're making are probably going to look a little bit like this one, where you just have a very simple prompt with some fields and labels for those fields. You know, you can have a date field, you can have exclusively numeric fields. You might hear me typing, but there's no text going in there until I type numbers. You can have checkboxes, you can have text areas, you can have drop-down menus. Text areas are actually different from text fields in that they have an unlimited capacity. So they're really good whenever you need a field for notes or comments or something like that. Now, you can get even more sophisticated with these widgets. If you use the same basic principles of this widget here and you just spend more time creating it, you might make a widget that looks like this. This is a chemical hazard risk assessment form, and it's got all kinds of different fields throughout the widget that allow the user to specify in high detail exactly how much risk is going to be undertaken by the lab when they do some procedure. And then you can even do things like do sophisticated calculations. So this widget has a variety of different calculations embedded within it. So as I start entering in numbers, you can see subsequent values are calculated in the fields below. And you can even do things like get conditional values to display. So you can see the field volume feeder stock will persistently display not enough feeders until I enter a sufficiently large value into the total number of feeders field. And then the calculation is performed. So if you wanted to do calculations like these, you need to know a little bit of JavaScript. We can help get you started online, but for in-depth troubleshooting, you'll have to consult your own JavaScript resources, since we don't really offer JavaScript 101 at LabArchives support. But as long as you do have sufficient JavaScript resources, or you yourself are really good with JavaScript, then you can create some very sophisticated widgets using our widget editor. And if you want to learn more about widgets, I highly recommend you contact me at pcallahan@labarchives.com, and we can set up a custom widget webinar for you. But that is it for LabArchives Professional Edition. Thank you for your interest, and thank you for attending. Before you go, I'd just like to let you know that you can contact LabArchives support if you ever need any help. Our U.S. hours are 9 a.m. Eastern Time to 8 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. If you contact us within those hours, which you can be done by phone or at support@labarchives.com, we'll likely get back to you within less than an hour, and of course, much shorter than that if you call us. And if you feel like you just need some quick help, remember you can always go to the online knowledge base by clicking Help at the top of the information icon menu. We've got over 100 articles on there where you can learn different things about LabArchives and you can type search for them. So I recommend you check that out as a first stop. But that is it. Again, thank you for your interest. I hope you enjoy LabArchives.